Practice test.
In this section, you will listen to 4 lectures and 2 conversations. You will hear each lecture and conversation 1 time. After each listening passage, you will answer some questions about it. Most questions are worth 1 point, but some questions are worth more than 1 point. The directions indicate how many points you may receive. You will have 30 to 40 minutes to both listen and answer the questions. The questions ask about the main idea and supporting details. Some questions ask about a speaker's purpose or attitude. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Your notes will not be scored. In some questions, you will see this icon. This means you will hear part of the lecture or conversation again. When you are ready, press Continue.
Listen to a lecture in a history class.
I'm sure you all have heard of the term yellow journalism. In case you haven't, it refers to a type of journalism that focuses on sensational topics that will get people's attention. It shouldn't be such a problem, except that it's also associated with, unethical practices, and sometimes even outright lying. There are plenty of modern examples of yellow journalism, but you might be surprised to learn that it first appeared more than a century ago. In spite of all the criticism it garnered then, it actually played an important role in many historical events of the era. It brought attention to the hardships of city life for immigrants, and later it drew public attention to the Spanish-American War. You're probably wondering how this was possible. Why don't we talk a little bit about how that happened? Let me begin by saying that yellow journalism was born, in an official sense, as a marketing strategy by a young newspaperman named Joseph Pulitzer. Very simply, Pulitzer wanted to find a way to get more people to read his paper. So he tried to make his paper interesting by including games and contests. Additionally, he realized that he could increase his readership significantly by tapping into the immigrant market, which, as you can imagine, was considerable in the early 19th century. So that's what he did, and his paper sold like crazy. At this point, I want to note that although Pulitzer wanted to find a way to make more money, he also felt that it was his duty to improve society. So, although he ran sensational headlines like Lines of Little Hearses or, How Babies Are Baked to catch people's attention, many of the articles were relevant to current events and society, especially to the immigrant community of New York City. Pulitzer's enterprise became quite lucrative, and it inspired another young man named William Hearst to follow in his footsteps. Hearst used many of the same techniques as Pulitzer. His paper featured attention-grabbing headlines, and its stories usually involved crime or celebrity scandals. Furthermore, at only 1 cent, his newspaper cost less than Pulitzer's. As readership grew, Hearst had to search high and low to keep finding scandalous material to draw readers. Many times, Hearst was criticized for embellishing stories, and when there was no story, Hearst was happy to stir one up. This was sort of the case with the Spanish-American War. See, prior to the outbreak of the war, Hearst supposedly told one of his reporters that he would furnish a war for him to cover. And when the war finally did break out in 1895, it was on the front page nearly every day. Political cartoons depicted the Spanish as brutal and cruel. The articles were not always accurate. That is, until Hearst himself traveled to Cuba to cover the events. Interestingly, although historians all pretty much agree that Hearst played a very minor role, if any, in starting the war, many say that his coverage later in the war helped promote awareness about the realities that the Cubans faced under Spanish rule.
1. What is the main topic of the lecture? 2. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
In case you haven't, it refers to a type of journalism that focuses on sensational topics that will get people's attention. It shouldn't be such a problem, except that it's also associated with, unethical practices, and sometimes even outright lying. There are plenty of modern examples of yellow journalism, but you might be surprised to learn that it first appeared more than a century ago.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
There are plenty of modern examples of yellow journalism, but you might be surprised to learn that it first appeared more than a century ago.
Three. According to the professor, why did Pulitzer target the immigrant community? Four. What does the professor imply when she says this?
Very simply, Pulitzer wanted to find a way to get more people to read his paper.
Five. What is the professor's attitude toward Hearst's role in the Spanish-American War? Six. How does the professor organize the information about yellow journalism that she presents to the class?